Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, Microsoft Office 365 to empower your not-for-profit. My name is Sakina Vora, and I'm the Volunteer Events and Marketing Officer here at Connecting Up. Our speaker today is Marcus Harvey. As Consulting and ICT Services Manager at Info Exchange, Marcus is responsible for providing advice to not-for-profits across Australia and New Zealand to help them make the most of technology. His team has already migrated scores of not-for-profits to Office 365, giving him practical knowledge about how to make the most of the cloud. So before I hand over to Marcus, just wanted to go through some housekeeping notes. To those who are new, please feel free to type in your questions in the question box, and we will try and make sure to answer all the questions during or at the end of the presentation. If you're facing any technical issues, like if you're having any audio issues or are unable to see the slides, please type in those issues as well, and we will get it sorted out for you. This presentation is being recorded, so everybody present will receive an email with a link to the recording and slides by end of day today. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Marcus.
Thanks, Sakina, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be talking about Office 365 and how it can empower your nonprofit. One of the things is that we are covering some of the more advanced, or we're not going into the details and the basics of Office 365. We'll cover them really quickly, but if you want to know the basics, attend the introductory session that's also being hosted by Connecting Up, and this then builds upon that. But by all means, ask questions and slow me down if you need to by typing into the chat box, because I will be stopping at regular times throughout the presentation. So I want to talk first of all about why we see as technology important for non-profits, because we do see that it's different in this sector than in the for-profit sector, and that influences how we use Office 365 and why we can get value from it. I then want to talk just about the cloud to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what it is and how we think of it, and some of the Office 365 features. And at the high level, just to make sure that people understand what it does and doesn't include without going into too much detail. I'll then talk about the benefits of Office 365 from a non-profit perspective and how it can help organisations, and then how to build the business case, because with Microsoft's new non-profit offer, which allows charities effectively to get Office 365 available free of charge for non-profits, while there may be no ongoing fees, but it always takes time and effort to make the migration. I'll be giving you a dozen implementation tips. These are the things that we've found through working with organisations that are important to consider for anyone to migrate to Office 365. We'll talk through a case study of an organisation that's used the product across Victoria to connect with members in other organisations. We'll run through a list of other resources. As Zakina said, you'll get this slide pack afterwards. It'll be emailed to you, and so one of the reasons for that resource pack is so that if you want to proceed yourself, you can do that. There's a list of resources there to help. Before a final, even though we will stop twice more during, pause for questions and anything that I haven't covered that people want to understand. So getting into it, what I see as our shared opportunity is that good technology is really important to make the most of staff and volunteer time. While most organisations or most staff and volunteers spend their time working in non-profits more for the love than the money, it's really important to make the most of their time, because if their time's not valued and if their computers are too slow or consistently break down, or the file servers doesn't allow them to be productive, there's some real challenges, and you're not making the most of their time, and you're not having the impact with your clients or your community or your members the way that you should. And good technology is a real part of that. The second thing that we're seeing more and more happening is that people are asking about from your services and from the activities you've done, tell me about the client and community outcomes you've achieved. And being able to tell that story, being able to tell the story of this is the client group with the issues that they started with, here's where they're at down the track after we've been working with them, here's the change and here's how our community has strengthened, is really important to attracting funding and attracting new staff and volunteers, whether that's funding from a government department, from a philanthropist or any other source. The third thing we see as important from a technology perspective is to minimise service risk. And because some of our work in New Zealand started as a result of the Christchurch earthquakes, and it's really hard to provide quality services if your servers are unavailable or if you don't have appropriate backups. Now, even though IT is really important for those three things, the challenge is that most non-profits feel they spend too much on ICT and they're not satisfied with their investment. And I suppose that's one of the things that Info Exchange is very passionate to change, and that's one of the things that Office 365 can really help with, to help you reduce your spend and to get better value out of your technology environment. And that's because there are three significant challenges that we hear. The three challenges are staying connected with distributed staff and volunteers, because many organisations have both staff and volunteers that work away from their main office, whether it be with clients in their homes, whether it be working out in the community, or simply allowing people to work at home. Staying connected and sharing information is a real challenge if your IT infrastructure is situated in your central office. A second challenge we hear about from a non-profit perspective is ensuring that you have reliable, cost-effective backups. In a number of our work, particularly when we visit new clients, we find that the backup processes are not always as robust as they need to be to ensure data is kept off-site and enabling organisations to continue to operate in the event of a disaster. Should the worst happen through a natural catastrophe, theft or just bad luck, it can be a big impact on organisations and they risk funding loss if they lose data. Maintaining those off-site data backups is a discipline that can often be hard to juggle when the pressing priorities of assisting one's clients and communities is forefront of people's minds. The third big challenge is access to funding for ICT. Many non-profits we work with rely on grant or block funding to keep technology up to date and supportable. As infrastructure degrades over time, when more pressing priorities take the fore, this means grant funding may not be available and staff are left with outdated, inefficient software and infrastructure. The last challenge is that of effective technical resources and access to those cost effectively, and this is really important to make sure that technology keeps running well. Now the cloud can help with a lot of that, and a general term for the cloud is it's a term that for delivering services over the internet, and that service can be any service. In a bit more detail, we see the cloud as a way to provide services that's characterised by reliability, and that's because there is inbuilt redundancy. It's easily expandable, allowing you to add or remove users, and so organisations can grow or shrink when they need to. It has usage-based pricing without the challenge of capital investment, and often that's on a per user basis or pay as you go, rather than a significant capital amount up front. And often, but not always, cloud services are accessible over the internet so that you can work anywhere with an internet connection. This can provide some real benefits to your staff who, when they work at home, or staff when they're working with clients. We've developed this slide set based on our work migrating more than 50 non-profits to Office 365. They include some of the organisations listed there, but we do also install local infrastructure for many clients. It depends on what's appropriate, and I'll try and give you a sense of how to make that decision in terms of whether the cloud is right for you today. I did want to touch on the different versions of Office. And most people will be familiar with the first three options on this slide. So Office Standard, Office Professional, Office Professional Plus, all involve a range of different applications, whether it be the most common Word, Excel and PowerPoint and Outlook, which most people are familiar with, or if it includes some of the more advanced services like InfoPath and Access and Publisher. Office 365 includes some additional services, effectively server services. So it includes Exchange, it includes a link server, it includes SharePoint, and it includes Yammer. And all of those can be used to replace what for many organisations was local infrastructure in their offices. So what is the Office 365 E1 plan? It includes professional email and shared calendaring. That's about 50 gigabytes per user. It includes Link for instant messaging and high-definition video and audio conferencing. You can also share your screen during a conference call so callers can see a presentation or other document. It includes SharePoint for storage of files and online collaboration and document management. It also includes Yammer for sharing information and collaborating across teams. It includes online versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint and OneNote, which you can use through a browser anywhere you've got access to the internet. And it includes strong privacy and security controls to ensure your documentation and your information is kept safe. One thing that I'll mention is that we do recommend that almost all non-profits purchase desktop Microsoft products from Connecting Up, and there's two links there to the Office 2013 Professional Plus software. The reason for that is that we find that for a very desktop products, when you're only paying $30 to $40 for them, is a worthwhile investment over and above the online products which are available with Office 365. So buying those desktop products of Word, Excel and PowerPoint and installing them on your PC is worthwhile. While they do come with the E3 plan, most organisations we've worked with haven't needed those. So some of my favourite Office 365 features and benefits. First of all, it allows staff to work anywhere and stay connected. And that's because information is readily accessible anywhere with an internet connection. You can share your calendaring and email. You can access it on mobile devices, whether it's an Android phone or tablet, whether it's an iPad, it's accessible anywhere. You can use video conferencing to connect independent of location, and that makes it much easier to stay connected with staff that are out of the office, or if you've got staff that work across multiple sites or in remote locations. It allows SharePoint, gives you SharePoint for file storage and collaboration, and that makes it much easier to collaborate independent of location, and you can work anywhere with an internet access and ensure you have the latest version of the document. It also means that organisations can get on with their jobs and worry less about technology, as server upgrades are reduced or eliminated, and giving you lower technology costs and more money to spend on other things that are more important. It means backup and redundancy is no longer a headache, and it gives you the flexibility to scale up or down as required. It also gives you a large volume of file storage, terabyte more than a terabyte of storage per user with 50 gig of mail, a terabyte of OneDrive space plus SharePoint space, and it gives you guaranteed uptimes with 99.9% guarantee. The last 3 months has been 99.98%. I used to work in a corporate environment, and that's a significant, that getting availability like that used to cost a huge amount of money. So making that available free of charge to organisations is a huge step forward. I might stop there and just check on questions. Sakina, have we got any questions so far?
Yes, Marcus, we do have a question here from Jenny. What does inbuilt redundancy mean?
Thanks, Sakina. Jenny, what that means is that essentially all your data is stored in 2 spots, and there are 2 servers that are able to provide you that information. So at the moment in Australia, there are 2 separate data centres in 2 separate locations, and if for any reason that has the Office 365 data in it for Australia, and if for any reason one data centre is no longer available or one server in that data centre is no longer available, a server in the second data centre can automatically pick up the load and answer the requests. So what that means is, unlike those organisations that have a server sitting under their desk or in a rack in their office, if you have a hardware failure or some other problem, there's another effectively duplicate server that can give you your information or process your email, etc. So have we got any other questions?
Yes, a question from Shirley. Is there a limit to the number of users?
Shirley, with the Office 365 for non-profits deal, there is no limit to the number of users. And so what we find organisations will often do is that will allow them to work to provide accounts to their volunteers as well, and help to bring them into the network and share information with them more easily.
Those were the 2 questions at this point, Marcus.
Any other questions?
Those were the only 2
Fantastic.
at this point.
I'll keep moving.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to touch, because for people looking to implement Office 365 and store files in there, there's 2 ways of doing it. The first option is OneDrive for Business. The second option is SharePoint Online. And OneDrive for Business gives a terabyte of space per user. It's not expandable, and every file is owned by a user. It's not intended for shared files. SharePoint gives you, used to be called, or is sometimes called team sites, and in SharePoint Online you get a gigabyte of disk space, plus that can be expandable, and every extra user you get another half a gigabyte or 500 megabytes. SharePoint Online is what we recommend people use to share files within teams and across the organisation. And that's because data is centrally managed and it's intended to be stored and shared across teams and across users. So we recommend SharePoint Online is used for sharing files, not OneDrive for Business. Now the nice thing is, both information in OneDrive and information in SharePoint Online can be taken offline with what's called the OneDrive desktop client. And then that allows you to take a copy of your files on your laptop, and you can then work offline with it, whether you be on the train, whether you be working in a regional area with limited internet connection. But that does allow you to work effectively offline on your files. And then what the OneDrive desktop client does is it automatically syncs back to SharePoint Online or back to OneDrive when you get your internet connection back up again. And it will process any changes and synchronize all the files back down to the cloud again. One of the biggest challenges that we have, or one of the questions that we have when people are thinking about Office 365 is privacy and security. And evaluating the suitability of Office 365 for your organisation, this is something you do need to think about, because at this point in time for Australian and New Zealand customers, all the data is stored offshore. It's either in Singapore or Hong Kong, actually in both countries. And while, for instance, Singapore has privacy controls and the Privacy Commissioner, it is different to what is here in Australia. But what we're finding more and more is that people are saying that it meets our needs. And the reason for that is Microsoft have put a lot of thought and effort into the privacy and security controls, and there's a lot of disclosure and a lot of controls around who can access the data and when. In a nutshell, it's got much stronger privacy and security controls than almost every organisation we've worked with in the non-profit space here in Australia. It's accredited to a range of international standards, including ISO 27001, the European Union Model Clauses, the Health Information Privacy Accountability Act, the Financial Institution Management Act. There's a range of different international standards that they're all accredited to, and there's links there if you want to know more. The important thing is that you own and you retain your rights to all your data, and Microsoft recognises that in the contract, and there's much stronger security controls than what we've seen. So there's fingerprint and biometric sensors to get into the data center. There's motion sensors, and it really does take it to the next level over and above what many non-profits that we've seen that have servers sitting around underneath desks or not locked up have today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, while an Australian data centre has been announced, today data is stored offshore, but many organisations, including Queensland Government, and I understand that there's a number of New Zealand departments currently looking at it, have chosen to use Office 365, which gives you an indication that they feel that it is appropriate to meet their needs. But its suitability does depend on what information you intend to store and your funding agreements. Every now and then we come across a particular funding agreement with a particular government department, usually, that requires you to store the information in a particular location. So it's very strong privacy and security, but just do your due diligence to make sure it's appropriate. Building the business case for Office 365, what we find is that even though it's a free service and it's for non-profits or charities, there's still time and effort in the migration. And if you're not an expert, you may decide that it makes sense to ask someone to help you with that process. So how do you build the business case? There's a range of different areas that we find often people find savings and benefit in. Our top tips are that you can justify the savings in the following areas. The first is to reduce or eliminate server upgrades and refreshes, saving IT support and server costs. This cost saving is usually the greatest if your infrastructure is near end of life and you're about to replace existing infrastructure or servers. The second is the use of video conferencing or teleworking structures to provide flexibility and reduce travel costs. We know one organisation that was able to recover or save the full amount of their migration cost to Office 365 by eliminating a teleconference subscription service, because Link has the ability to teleconference within it. The third is to defend against hardware failure. With the guaranteed uptime, you don't need to worry about your server failing or losing your data to theft or disaster. The fourth being efficiency savings that come from being able to collaborate effectively across all locations, saving time, and that single source of truth which allows you to reduce the amount of time that staff spend searching for information across email trails or in my document folders. I might stop again, Zakina, and just check, have we got any other questions?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions here. A question here from Rod. Are the files stored locally?
Yep, so Rod, as mentioned in the last slide, the files in the cloud is currently in Hong Kong and Singapore. You can use the OneDrive desktop client to take your files locally on your PC, but that is a copy of what exists in Hong Kong and Singapore.
Another question here from Rod. If a user retires, can we destroy their local copy?
If a user retires, what you need to do is it's dependent on your management of the device that they've stored it on. So, for instance, what we require and we recommend is that there's the ability to wipe iPhones to remove the local copy of mail stores. If it's on a local Windows computer, you need access to that Windows computer to remove those copies of the files. If you're using normal practices of connecting it to a domain, that gives you the ability to control access to that device, and then you can take appropriate action.
Last question here from Shirley. She says she wasn't clear on why OneDrive is not suitable for file sharing.
Shirley, so OneDrive is really good for personal storage of documents. So for instance, the OneDrive for Business is really good if you want to store documents there for your personal business use. So for instance, I use that for preparing, business plans or board papers or professional development activities, and so it's really good for that. It's not as good for team structures, and that's because the security gets a little complex. All the security is based on individuals, and so if you want to share it with a team, it becomes very complex. If you've only got 2 or 3 staff, that's not an issue. Once you get to 30 or 40 staff, you really need groups to manage security, and that's where you need to use SharePoint Online. So it's really because the security in OneDrive for Business is done at an individual rather than a group level, which makes it complex to share files.
That was our last question, Marcus.
Fantastic. So, I did want to share with you 12 tips that we have for successful implementation. And the first of those is to implement the most valuable areas of Office 365 first, and then do the others later. Okay? Office 365 is powerful with lots of different features and lots of different options. For most organisations, there's far too much to do in any one go. So what we say is, look at what it offers. Maybe it's file sharing, maybe it's video conferencing, maybe it's email. Whatever it is, do that first, right? And don't try and bite off too much. Help people get used to using it. Once that's up and running well, then come along with more functionality. That might be 3 months, that might be 18 months down the track. So take it in stages, just do the bit that offers value for you. The second thing is that particularly if you're an organisation that has lots of locations or multiple locations, it's really important to consciously explain the benefits to staff and support them making the change. In fact, that's important no matter how many locations you have. If you have multiple locations, thinking about whether there's local champions that you can empower and give a little bit of extra training or help can help staff to make the most of the new features. That's particularly important in the move to SharePoint. If all you're using is email and you're using Exchange Online and you've been using Exchange Server in the past, most staff won't even notice the fact that it's changed. They'll just notice that it may well be more reliable than what you've had in the past. The third tip is look at your internet bandwidth and reliability. One of the great things about Office 365 is that it's stored in the cloud, but because of that, it usually places a greater load on your internet. And if you want to store large files or run video conferences, what we generally find is that most organisations, or many organisations, need to upgrade both their internet bandwidth and also their data limits. Reliability is also important, and one of the things we say is that think about how you're going to operate if you lose access to your internet for a day or two, because at some stage from some people that will happen. And it's about using offline files suitably, and it's also about working effectively from home or from an internet cafe or like. But we do recommend organisations do look at that internet bandwidth and their reliability. The fourth is make effective use of the OneDrive desktop client for offline file access, and we've spoken about that. That if you do that, you'll probably need to invest in some bandwidth and manage any sync issues that come up when you reconnect after going offline. Because if two people edit a file offline, then that needs some assistance, but you're automatically notified of that. The fifth is consider upgrading Office on your PCs. Office 365 doesn't work with Office 2003, just to give an example, but it works really well with Office 2013. If you're running some older versions of Office, for instance Office 2010, you're going to need to ensure all the latest service packs are installed and make sure you're up to date so you can connect and work effectively. If you're making the migration, most organisations we've worked with end up thinking or deciding that because we're touching the PCs and helping people through a transition, it makes sense to upgrade Office on those PCs at the same point in time, because you're going to save money over doing it in a year or two. Number 6 is to use an Office 365 expert to make the transition a success and to assist with ongoing support if that's required, because while you can do it yourself, there are some challenges in here, and we've tried to give you the top tips if you decide to do it yourself to help you through that process. But making sure that people are up and running and can use it effectively and get the most out of the environment is really important. Number 7, consider some local storage if you share large videos or quantities of photos or other large files. And that's really because while you can store these things in the cloud, it is slower to access than if it's local. And if you're doing video editing or some manipulation of really large documents on a regular basis, you just need to consider whether or what the best approach is for that. Number 8, review your security controls and policies. Now the great thing about Office 365 is that your information is accessible anywhere. The challenge in Office 365 is that your information is available anywhere. So some organisations that we've seen, if they're used to having only information available or their files available within their office, and outside of their office you can't access anything, then we have seen for instance, passwords being shared or not being changed regularly. Now, Office 365 enforces strong passwords, but if you have a practice of sharing passwords, that's something that we very strongly recommend changes, and that you educate your staff about what appropriate security controls are to make sure that they understand that, with the ability to work anywhere means that you do need to think about maintaining access and maintaining appropriate security controls. Number 9 is that if you're a larger organisation, Active Directory can still offer value simply because of the efficiencies of scale it provides in managing computers, in deploying group policies, software deployment, allowing people to move across computers, all those sorts of things. Number 10, and this one always surprises me that it still comes up, is that if you're going to use video or audio conferencing and you have an open plan office, please invest in some headsets. I'm still surprised by the number of people, or the number of times I hear, gee, the audio conferencing is not working well, people had trouble hearing me and it broke up. And when you go and look at the issue, it's due to the fact that they're working on a speaker and a microphone in an open plan office with a lot of background noise. So a headset is really important if that's something that's important for your organisation. Number 11 is the online collaboration spaces can be really valuable for boards and volunteers to bring them into the organisation, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't a cost for additional users, for the Office 365 for non-profits offer, and so bringing your volunteers into the organisation and sharing information with them and giving them access to whether it be an intranet or a volunteer board, and making them feel part of that your organisation is really important. It's also great for your board to minimise paper documents and to also engage them in conversation outside of the formal meetings, if you want to do that. Yammer can also be really a very valuable tool for collaboration, particularly for larger organisations. And the larger you are and the more value there is in collaborating outside traditional team structures, Yammer becomes really, really important. I say, if you're not familiar with Yammer, it's like Facebook for organisations. I might pause again there. Zakina, any more questions? Or should I keep going?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. Question here from Rod. Do we also get website hosting? And is it all hosted by Telstra?
Rod, a couple of great questions. The Office 365 for non-profits at this stage is only available through Microsoft. It's not available through Telstra. So there's the answer to the second question. With SharePoint Online, which is part of the 365 suite, you can provide a public website. So it is absolutely possible, and we've done it for plenty of clients now, to host a website within SharePoint for Office 365, but it is within SharePoint. It's not necessarily, it will depend what your current technology stack is for your website and whether or not that's applicable or appropriate for you. If you don't have a website, it's a great, cheap and easy option.
Another question, does the OneDrive client also stores the SharePoint files?
Yes, the OneDrive client can store and can synchronize the SharePoint files as well.
Since Office 365 works well with the latest Office 2013, what about Mac users that only have Office 2011 as the latest?
So yes, it works with Mac 2011 as well. And so you can, we here at Info Exchange and also for some of our clients, we've got plenty of Mac users. And so you can certainly connect, Outlook 2011 and also Word and all the others into the Office 365 environment. At this point in time, there is no OneDrive Business for Mac, so the offline files isn't an option at the moment. And we have seen a few little niggles with Outlook and unread marks and some little annoying things like that. So it still works, it's still very functional. We've got a dozen people in our office, and we've got more than that in clients using it effectively, but it's not quite as fully feature rich. What we've heard, so I haven't got this in writing so I can't guarantee it, is that they're busy developing a new Office version for Mac. I mean, one of the primary things is because it's now 2011, so it's now 2014, so Office 2011 is 3 years old. So we're looking forward to that coming out so that Mac users get exactly the same environment and features as all the other Windows clients.
Sorry, is there a way to build in telephone services with 365? A question here from John. He says, as we are moving offices and don't own a phone system.
Short answer, John, is not easily, unless you move down a hybrid deployment model. It is very easy, sorry, I should have said this first, to enable teleconferencing with dial-in numbers. Okay, so that's, you know, you subscribe to a dial-in number service, off you go. At this point in time, the integration with telephony is the E4 plan in Office 365. There's no date for that in Australia at this point in time. Those clients that need it have gone down a hybrid model with some services in the 365 cloud and deploying Link locally for local telephony services. So it's possible to give a seamless environment, but you do need local infrastructure and someone that really knows what they're doing.
Last question here from Shirley. I understand that SharePoint can have significant development costs. Is the version in Office 365 able to be used in a limited way without that?
So Shirley, yes, you can use the Office 365 version of SharePoint very easily to store files and create a very simple intranet, and there should not be a significant development cost within that. Larger organisations will sometimes do a very significant and complex intranet, and you can even do application development within SharePoint, and yes, there can be significant development costs in that, but you can get up and running with some team sites very quickly and easily within SharePoint. It does come down to how large your organisation is and and whether or not you're comfortable developing some simple web parts for SharePoint, which is relatively easy to do.
That was our last question, Marcus.
Lovely. All right, so just moving on. Quick case study, and this one is of Regional Sports Network Victoria. They're the peak body that supports 9 independent organisations across the state. These 9 organisations are charged with the role of supporting local community-based sport and rec organisations, and their role involves the provision of training, information, advice and skills development on behalf of all these clubs. So RSMV covers a population of about 1.5 million Victorians, has a network of more than 8,500 community-based sport and recreation clubs, and this diversity used to pose them a real range of challenges prior to Office 365. And the challenges were, how do you provide reliable ICT infrastructure for staff who are distributed across an area of more than 250,000 square kilometres in size? It was, how do you support organisations whose size varies significantly, some with only a couple of staff and others with 20 or more? And how do you foster collaboration and information sharing across that network? Now RSMV chose to implement Office 365 with Exchange Online, Link and SharePoint to overcome those challenges. And the benefits that they got as a result of this change included the fact that they had a much lower technology risk. The system had guaranteed uptime, backups were automatically taken care of, and they no longer needed so many technical experts, whether it be Exchange, whether it be file servers. They could focus on just keeping the basics running. It also gave them time savings in the order of 10 to 15%. Now, predominantly this was from reduced travel cost because video conferencing is far more time efficient, and improvements in information accessibility. Staff were much more easily able to find relevant information in the cloud rather than searching individual mailboxes and PCs because they were such a location distributed group of organisations. And the other one which really surprised me, but when you think about it, it made a whole lot of sense. This is what they said, is that they also had happier staff. Staff work at RSMV because they want to develop and they're passionate about community sport. Prior to Office 365, it was really difficult to provide that quality support to local organisations because it was hard to find the right information and provide that assistance. These days staff can find what they need, they're able to support RSMV clients, and that had the initially unexpected, but in retrospect it probably should have been, benefit that staff are less frustrated and feel they're providing a more valuable service to clients. Overall, it enabled them to work effectively despite that geographic diversity and limited IT capability. This is a challenge that we know most non-profits face, for a very competitive price. And they moved back on the Telstra deal, which was in the order of $7 per user per month. So they made the decision and got all these savings and benefits even before it was free. I want to just leave you with a couple of links, or talk to you about a couple of links as well. So Office 365 resources for a bit more information, and as mentioned, Sakina will email this pack out. If you're interested in Office 365 but you're not really sure about are you ready and what the next steps are, we've partnered with Connecting Up and we're offering Office 365 readiness assessments, and there's links there for both the readiness assessment in Australia and New Zealand, and that's a great way for understanding, are you ready, what might you need to do, are your versions of Office compatible, how's your internet links, what do you need to think about. There's the link, the Office 365 for non-profits, which is a link straight to the Microsoft site where you can sign up and get access to Office 365 for non-profits. So that's available at no cost. It's provisioned. Essentially you get a trial license when you start, and then they go through the validation process. But if you want to give it a go, you can get up and running in minutes and get access to your files and your email. I think it was Shirley, you can have a play with SharePoint, you can see whether or not it is easy for you to get a handle on and store files in, and you don't have to give anyone else access. So that's the best way we usually recommend. If you want to just get a better feel for it, jump on, apply for the non-profit version, and off you go. The E1 versus the E3 plan, there was no questions on that today, but sometimes people ask what's the difference between the E1 plan, which is available free of charge for non-profits, and the E3 plan, which is about $4.50 per user per month, $5.80 per user per month, sorry, in Australia, and slightly more than that in New Zealand, but similar when you look at the exchange rate. And there's a link there just to the differences if you're interested. Both Australian and New Zealand privacy principles, as well as Microsoft answers to those, and also the Microsoft Trust Center, which provides a whole stack of privacy, security information, actual availability over the last 3 months. 98% of the questions I get asked on privacy and security for people that have concerns, the answers are in the Microsoft Trust Center, and the nicest thing, it's actually written in non-technical speak, so it's easy to understand. Improve IT is a website that we've been working with Connecting Up on, and that's a website with resources that are designed to help non-profits get the most from your technology investment. So there's a range of good practice guides and the information to help organisations get better value for technology, and it's specifically designed for non-profits. And so with partners like the Ministry of Social Development, Microsoft New Zealand, Department of Human Services, Department of Communications federally here in Australia, there's a whole range of different organisations supporting that work. So some final thoughts before I open it up for another set of questions, or a last set of questions. Office 365 enables you and your organisation to share information, work effectively irrespective of location, reduce your infrastructure costs, telework, and improve your disaster readiness. So one of the things, it can really make a huge difference to organisations, particularly if you're struggling with the cost of technology, and we strongly recommend you consider it. That's it. Sakina, any more questions?
Marcus, we do not have any more questions at this point, but as you mentioned, I will be including all the links as well in the email. And as I mentioned before, this session is being recorded, so I will also email all our participants a link to the recording and the slides. We could probably give them a couple of more minutes. I'm sure there are a lot of questions here. Would you like to continue, or would you like to share some more information?
Look, I suppose the other key bit of information that it would be worth sharing is just talking a little bit about SharePoint, because what we are finding is that more and more non-profits are using SharePoint as a really valuable file storage and information storage tool. And so SharePoint is what we're seeing today. More and more organisations are deciding to migrate their files and their information to SharePoint, as well as use it for project management or client management tools. And because it does allow, it is a very feature-rich environment that you can use irrespective of location. You just need access to the internet. It allows people to work effectively, whether they're in the central office, whether they're working from home because they might have a sick child, or whether they're out and about at a client site or working sort of remotely from the office. And so we are seeing a lot more interest and movement from organisations in moving to SharePoint. If you do have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact me. My contact details are at the bottom of the page and also on the first page, so we're always happy to help organisations get better value from their technology spend, and Office 365 for non-profits from Microsoft is one of the ways that people can do that really effectively.
We do have a question here, Marcus.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's no more questions, we might let people go a few minutes early. There is also, I will mention just before, in the slide pack, there's two appendices. I'm not going to go through these because they haven't been asked, but sometimes they do. What happens if the internet goes down? So there's a range of different options in terms of how people can work. And there's some commentary on internet bandwidth and just how to think about that, and how to think about, is yours appropriate or isn't it? Okay, Zakina.
Question here from Rod. Do you recommend a local master backup of files?
Rod, no, I don't, and simply because that's hard to do and costly. What we recommend is that and because, for instance, as well, you can roll back to previous versions of files. If files are deleted, they're available in a recycle bin for 90 days. If you're particularly nervous, you can synchronize a PC to, using the OneDrive desktop client, so you have an additional local copy that sort of you can see and feel and touch. Every time, and the tool sets change regularly, and every time we've investigated tools to take backups of SharePoint information and files, it's been cost prohibitive for the non-profits that we've worked with, and I would suspect for almost all non-profits, unless there's some legal obligation. Every time we talk about how it needs to be done, it's quite costly. So most organisations, we haven't found anyone taking local copies. If you need it for audit purposes, things like the E3 plan with legal hold and things are the most cost-effective way of doing that.
That was the last question, Marcus. So we can wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much for presenting. I will also include a link in my email about our webinars on Introduction to Office 365. And also you'll be receiving an email with a link to the recording and slides. So until next time, thank you everybody, and thank you Marcus for presenting. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sakina. Thanks everyone.